Mr. Vice President, I know you're under a lot of duress to make up the lost ground. But I think people will be better served if we don't keep interrupting each other.
Well, don't take all the 4 minutes then.
Things getting testy at Thursday's debate. Vice President Biden and Congressman Ryan clashed with us about everything. It was great TV and says a lot about next month's election. Let's bring in my political all-star panel, Democratic strategist Michael Feldman, who served as senior advisor to then Vice President Al Gore, also business strategist and best-selling author Carol Roth, and Republican pollster Kristen Soltis. Welcome to you all.
Thanks, Piers.
Let me start with you, Mike Feldman. You've been in this position of taking part in debates and so on. What did you think? Who do you think won last night?
I think Joe Biden won the debate last night. I mean, his mission was to go in, energize Democrats, defend the president's record, and challenge Congressman Ryan on some of the misrepresentations that they've made about the Obama-Biden record, and frankly, ask him for specifics about what they would do, this mystery tax plan, and whose budget are they actually running on. I think he did all of that last night. He did it really well.
Kristen Soltis, presumably you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that, but I think it is possible for Republicans to really think that their guy won and for Democrats to really think their guy won. I don't think this is just partisan spinning because both men went in with such different objectives. I think Joe Biden went in with his objective being, I'm going to heckle the Republicans, I'm going to fire up my base, and he did that. And I think Paul Ryan said, I got to go in and I've got to prove that I could be vice president or president of the United States. I think there are no Republicans out there complaining about his performance, so I think he did a good job. I think he did exactly what he needed to.
See, I just don't agree. I think Joe Biden won it quite easily. I think that I was amazed that any of the polls had it even close.
In the CNN poll, there's actually a really interesting finding. So it gave a slight edge to Ryan when they asked, these folks who'd watched who they thought won.
It's basically a tie once you take in the...
It was pretty close, but within the poll, 70% of people said that Biden spent more time attacking his opponent, which I think both Democrats and Republicans would point to as proof that their guy won. So I do think it's a little more inconclusive than you think it is, Piers.
All right, Carol, let's turn to you, because you were tweeting away last night. The whole thing's completely tedious, meaningless, and has no relevance to anything on God's earth.
Well, I don't think that was the exact tweet, Piers, but I think it was a whole lot of nothing. And unfortunately...
Okay, let me read your exact tweet. It was a whole lot of nothing, you said.
It was sort of like on Charlie Brown when you hear the teacher going, wah, 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 wah. Unfortunately, that translates into a loss for Romney and Ryan, because the only thing that matters, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. What matters is what undecided voters think, who they think won in terms of who is getting their vote. And unfortunately, the burden is on Romney and Ryan. We already know what to expect with Biden and with Obama, but unfortunately, Romney and Ryan have the burden to say we can change the trajectory of the conversation of what's going on in the country and do it well. And that didn't happen with clarity and conviction last night.
I half agree with Carol on that point. But the other part of the equation is...
But I don't think you can agree with that point, because the only poll I've seen about undecided was done by any major network, was CBS, and it was pretty clear who won the debate amongst uncommitted voters. Ryan 31%, Biden 50%. I mean, he smashed him, which was my reading of it in the moment.
Well, look, people are voting right now in Ohio. Okay, so if you've made up your mind in Ohio and you watched last night's debate and you were energized by it and you went out to the polls and you voted, then that makes an impact on the election. Governor Romney can't win without Ohio. And there is a narrow sliver of voters that are still in play in some of these states. And I think when Joe Biden asks Congressman Ryan to defend his tax plan and he can't give an answer, well, that matters to that undecided voter. Is my middle-class tax cut going to go away? Is my home mortgage deduction going to go away? That matters to undecided voters.
Did it matter that he drank so much water? We've got a little montage here of at least 7 occasions, which is not the whole lot by any means, where Ryan just keeps on glugging in a very nervous, repetitive way. It's actually quite amusing. It's always the same technique, the lean over, the long stare at the cup, boom. I mean, I was amazed he kept it all in. I mean, Kristen Soltis, what did you make of his extraordinary water intake? Because Joe Biden, I don't think had a drink at all.
I think staying hydrated is really important. I mean, I think that Joe Biden, he's been in politics forever. He's very comfortable in a debate setting. Paul Ryan, he's a younger guy, and I think he did a really great job holding his own in a debate that was predominantly foreign policy, which has been Joe Biden's kind of wheelhouse during his entire long career in politics. So for me, for Paul Ryan to hold his own in that kind of environment, even if he's got to drink a lot of water to kind of keep cool and just stay level-headed, I think he did a good job. I think I'm proud that Paul Ryan's on our ticket.
Carol Roth, would you rather have a presidential, vice presidential candidate who drinks a lot of water in a nervous way, or one like Joe Biden who just toughs it out?
Well, I think Joe Biden clearly had a lot of Mountain Dew before he went on the debate, where Paul Ryan favored the water. Look, obviously the experience factor played in here. Paul Ryan was so focused on making the key points that he wanted to make that he didn't retort back. He didn't push back on Biden the way that Romney did against Obama. He didn't put him on the defense. He didn't, with conviction, say, here is your track record.
But the problem he had, and I'll put this to Mike Feldman, is as we can see here from a montage of Joe Biden, Biden just kept laughing at him in a sort of outrageously dismissive way. Now, when I first began to see this, I tweeted, please stop doing this. This is not presidential at all, or vice presidential. As it went on, I found it increasingly infectious and began laughing with him. Which can't help Ryan, can it?
Look, I don't think how much Joe Biden smiled or how hydrated Paul Ryan is going to decide the election, but I agree with you. I think that sentiment, that split-screen moment when the vice president was actually expressing some frustration with some of the answers that weren't being addressed, was shared by a lot of Democratic activists last night, and I think they agreed with that sentiment. He was actually using that real estate to his advantage. I think
that's a misread of the situation. I think people were put off by that, but I think that was the expectation going in. People expected Joe Biden to act like that. The burden was on Ryan to come and basically say, we're adding something to the equation, and he didn't do that with conviction, except for one time. One time he had conviction. It was on the issue of abortion, and that is the wrong issue to have conviction with the undecided vote.
When we come back, let's get to the more important debate, which comes on Tuesday next week, because if Mitt Romney was to win that big time, you could say that could be the ultimate game changer. Let's discuss after the break.
Mr. Ryan said last night that Governor Romney was a car guy. I thought, well, if having an elevator stack him it counts, I guess he was. But
Bill Clinton taking a shot at Mitt Romney today. Fair to say the campaign is getting ever dirtier as Election Day approaches. Let's bring back my all-star team, Kristen Soltis, Michael Feldman and Carol Roth. I thought it was a very interesting part of the debate last night, which I thought was one of the reasons I gave the win to Biden, was the exchange over the stimulus money, particularly in the state of Wisconsin. Let's have a look at this clip.
He sent me 2 letters saying, by the way, can you send me some stimulus money for companies here in the state of Wisconsin? We sent millions of dollars. You know why? He said
you did ask for stimulus money.
Sure he
correct?
did. By the way,
on 2 occasions, we advocated for constituents who are applying for grants. That's what we do.
And there are claims in the Huffington Post tonight that it may have been as many as 4 requests. So I thought he got him there. Kristen Soltis, what did you think in that moment? Because it was a difficult moment for your guy.
Yeah, it made me a little nervous as the moment started, but I think Paul Ryan handled it well. It's very routine that when, you know, a constituent is applying for grants, that your office kind of handles it. Congressional offices handle all sorts of stuff, helping advocate for their constituents, helping get them flags and give them Capitol tours, and when they need letters of recommendation to service academies, they help coordinate that. There are lots of services that a congressional office provides to their constituents, and this was part of it.
So he should be grateful. He should be grateful, really, to the government for providing it, right?
No, we shouldn't be grateful about the stimulus. You can oppose the stimulus, but say, look, if the money's going to be there, and I've got a constituent who's applying for a grant, you know, I'm not going to leave my constituents out in the cold and put them at a disadvantage.
Well, you would if you were principled, I think, on it. Anyway, let's turn to next week's debate, because it's going to be a big one. Carol Roth, how are you seeing it going? It's very, very important that Barack Obama comes back with a win, isn't it?
Well, it depends on who you're voting for. From my standpoint, I think it's really important that Romney comes back with that clarity and conviction that I was talking about, the way that he did in the first debate. Again, the burden is on his ticket to point out the track record, point out that things have not gone well the last 4 years, including 2 years with an all-Democratic Congress, and to show how he and Ryan can change what is going to happen with the future of the country. And he did it brilliantly in the first debate. The good news is that I don't think Ryan did anything to screw that up. I think it was more of a squandered opportunity. So I think that Romney has an opportunity to go back and to reassess the dominance here to change the dialogue and to change the mind of those undecided
voters.
voters.
I certainly agree with that, although I don't agree with you about who won last night. I think in the end, it will prove to be fairly immaterial if Barack Obama, Mike Feldman, has another disaster like last week. On Tuesday, it could be game over for him.
Well, I don't know about that. Look, I wouldn't...
Don't you?
No, I don't think so.
If he lost by the same degree that he lost the other night, wouldn't that really be the end?
Well, look at what's happened since. I mean, I actually don't think the polls have moved as much as the decision that was rendered by all of us about how that debate went down. But look, I wouldn't expect the Incredible Hulk on Tuesday night, but I do think the president is going to come out and be a little bit more assertive, defend the record more vigorously, not let some of these assertions go unchallenged. But let's not forget, this is a different format. This is a town hall format debate. And so there's 3 levels of chess going on. There's a moderator who's trying to keep time. There's your opponent who you have to address. There's somebody asking questions. And then there's the rest of the country who's the audience that you're really talking to and trying to deliver your message. So it will be a different environment. I wouldn't expect the president to come out with boxing gloves on.
Kristen, last word to you. How do you think it's going to go on Tuesday?
I think you're going to see another really great performance from Governor Romney. I think he's going to continue that same strategy of trying to position himself as the alternative, not just criticizing the president, but trying to talk about what he'd do and tell us how a Romney administration would run America. I do think that President Obama is going to come back with a very different strategy. I think his advisors have probably told him that he needs to put more energy into this. He may pursue a strategy of trying to fire up his base. I don't think that's what he needs to do to win in undecided voters. So part of me kind of hopes he does it.
Well, it'll be a fascinating night. I'm sure we'll all talk again next week. My money is on an Obama fight back, but will it be enough? I'm not convinced. I thought he was very lackluster the other night. He's got to really raise the game pretty substantially. Anyway, thank you to my all-star panel, Kristen Soltis, Mike Feldman and Carol Roth. And we'll be back next with more politics and much more.